And we'll give everyone a few minutes to get logged in. We are expecting a nice group today. We'll get started at about 3 after the hour and go from there. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our first panel webinar. We'll be discussing presenting Income Lab to your clients, and we have 3 wonderful financial advisors who have joined us. We have John, who goes by JC Corrigan, Andy Anderson, and Ryan Townsley, along with Justin, who will be moderating this panel discussion. Along the way, we'll have questions with the advisors, and at the end, we will go over any questions that you all have. So we'll be saving those till the end. Also at the end, we have a survey and some announcements. So please hang on till the very end. But with that, I will pass it over to Justin and we'll get started.
All right, thank you, Taylor, and thanks everybody for joining us. This is by far our most requested topic, so I'm really excited to bring you a panel discussion on what it's like to present Income Lab plans to clients, how to do that, you know, the transition process for people as they as in their own practice, how they began using Income Lab, but also what it's like to kind of take a client who's going into retirement and introduce them to guardrails and adjustments and so on. You know, Income Lab was like the point of Income Lab is to improve financial outcomes and experiences and help advisors really provide amazing guidance through retirement. And you know, although that is, you know, we do a lot of webinars and a lot of it is presenting kind of research backing this up. This is, you know, really well supported. But I think a lot of you have told us there's a change in kind of communication and maybe workflow and stuff that you're trying to understand, trying to grasp and kind of get your, you know, the best practices for using Income Lab with clients. So I'm really pleased, very happy to have 3 advisors who use Income Lab in their practices, who are really generous with their time and agreed to be part of this panel. Andy Anderson, JC Corrigan, and Ryan Townsley. So I'm going to kind of be the moderator. So I'll kind of ask questions and prompt and kind of, you know, it'll be a little bit organic, but hopefully that it'll be really useful to everybody. And then if you want to put your questions in the Q&A, we'll get those at the end, just so that we kind of keep the the flow going. So let's begin at the beginning, I guess. The first question, and I think it's the kind of highest level one, is, how do you present and talk about adjustment-based or guardrails-based income lab plans to a client? And maybe if you have experience presenting kind of pass fail, success failure Monte Carlo plans previously, what was it like to kind of make that transition both for yourself and with clients? What did clients kind of make of this transition? So Andy, maybe I'll start with you since you're on my upper left here.
Yeah, so I'll just say personally, we worked with eMoney before, so obviously using the Goal Planner a lot, Decision Center, and working with the probability of success. And I was, I got material on Income Lab, and I looked through the kind of the trailer on what it does and how it worked, and really spoke to me just from a perspective of, retirement is not static. Retirement is dynamic in nature, and changes are going to be needed. We know that ahead of time. So being able to present it in a way to where we're saying, we are going to let you know when changes are required to make sure that your retirement stays on track, with just a different view of the presentation to the client. And just from personal experience, when we're using a probability of success, we might throw up there and say, hey, you've got a 93% chance of success in retirement. And to us, that's really, really good. 93% chance of success is a very high rate. But, the client, a lot of times there's kind of that blank stare where they're like, well, there's 7% chance that I fail. And it's like, they focus on that. Well, what if we run out? What if we're not able to spend? What if we lose our house? All these bad thoughts go through their mind. So adjusting from a success failure, we don't really want to bring up the thought of failure, adjusting from that to more of a dynamic adjusting over time plan has been huge for me. I can say just anecdotally from the meetings I've had with clients since we started using Income Lab over a year ago now, I'd say we started with Income Lab. The reaction, the discussion, just even the nonverbal cues from clients has been completely different. I kind of frame the discussion and say, in the past, you may have worked with advisors, or maybe even with our practice, we may have looked at something where we say, there's a certain percent chance of failure or success. And I kind of lay it out and I say, we might look and say, okay, there's a 93% chance of success, but most of our clients, I kind of joke with them, I say most of our clients don't like seeing, well, there's still a 7% chance I might run out of money or I might fail. And a lot of times I get a laugh, a chuckle, clients give me a smile. They're like, yeah, we don't like thinking about that. And I say the way this software is different, the way we're using this now, and the reason we like this better is because we're no longer looking at success or failure. We're basically saying success is our goal, and success is what we want to work towards and make sure we're living out. So in order to reach that success, we're going to be monitoring the plan as we go along and making changes as needed to ensure that success is always in our reach throughout retirement. So just reframing the conversation has been huge.
That's awesome. Thank you. JC, Ryan, either of you have thoughts?
So genius steals. So I'm gonna quote Dr. Daniel Crosby, which a bunch of people are probably familiar with. He wrote in The Behavioral Investor, "Money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised." So I look at it as, notice how he said money and not probabilities. And being in a place where you can have conversations about money, which I consider more of an attribute, and probabilities being more of a characteristic, it leads to much deeper conversations. So, hey, okay, so that my spending capacity is at $9,000. What does it take to get to $10,000? Or, gee, I'm at $9,000 there. I feel like I'm busting my tail feathers to keep it at $6,500 pre-retirement. Where's that balance in life? So I think having that conversation around money where that what if I save $500 more, how does that change my future? Or what if I save $500 less a month? How does that change my present? is a place where it's really made a difference and a much more tangible conversation. So going back to the previous comment about blank stares, those blank stares are going away. They are asking questions around a unit that they understand and how it impacts them.
So for that conversation, it sounds like you're really focusing on, basically this, right? Like just focus in on the what can I spend question.
That is correct. And at the same time, they understand that that's a dynamic number. I actually had one client tell me, so is that like my personal S&P 500? And I said, yeah, in a lot of ways it is. It's going to go up and down based on a multitude of factors, and not just the PE of various companies, but your personal PE based on how things change, based on your lifespan, your income, your raises. If your wife stops working, we expect that number to change. And here's where we can play with that so that you understand the impact of it based on what's in your control. So you know if that's a trade-off you're willing to make today, and how that is derived in a dollar sign versus a percentage sign.
I like it.
Yeah, Justin, I work with a unique group of clientele. My former profession was in nuclear power, so my firm really focuses on working with people from nuclear power. So a lot of engineers, scientists, analytical types. And you can imagine that, with that type of person, and that's the way I'm wired too, is just questions would always arise with probability of success is what is the difference? What's the difference between 76% and 77%? How does that affect my actual plan? What do I do if my probability of success changes, as the market changes or my spending changes, right? Like how do we manage that like in a dynamic environment? And changing that conversation over to here are your, here's your guardrails, here's where we have to make a change, really resonated with them, especially, just working in a power plant where things have limits. And if they go outside of limits, you take action. So you're not exactly worried about what is going to happen, but if it does happen, here's the exact action we're going to take to mitigate it. It just really resonated with every single person I presented to.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, like some metaphors for adjustment, guardrails based planning. I hadn't thought about the power plant one, but I think about like once you're in retirement, you actually want to know what to do, and you also might want to know if you don't have to do anything. Right? Hey, it's fine. You're 76 went to 77. You want to be able to say, don't worry about it, which really means you don't want them to look at that number at all, right? Like imagine if your GPS, your like Google Maps or Waze, you're driving on the highway and it says, your probability of success went from 80 to 60. Like, so should I get off the highway? What am I doing, right? So this like focus on like, do I need to do something? If so, what? Right. That's
yeah. And I would have I actually have my probability of success meter for each client linked in their portal. So every time they would log in, they would see it. And you can imagine, especially during volatile times like last year and this year, that number was changing a lot. And that sparked a lot of conversations, a lot of phone calls. And as I was just migrating everyone over to Income Lab, it just changed the anxiety level of, instead of watching that meter, of knowing exactly, everything is fine unless we hit this point, and things are still fine. We just have to make a change. Right? It was just a different conversation.
Right.
Yeah, again, can I add, Justin? So on that probability of success, I think it changes the expectation for the client entering retirement. If we're talking probability of success and we say, okay, 80% success, 20% failure. Well, without knowing what it would take to change the plan, essentially the client's going into it hoping, essentially it is a hope, saying, well, I hope I'm not on one of those 20% of retirement outcomes. I hope it's going to play out the way I want it to. And if not, we don't know what we're going to do, essentially. But with this, we're saying, again, we're wanting to make sure that you're on the track to success. So in order to do that, here are, like you said, Ryan, here are the guardrails that will cause us to make a change. And not only that, but here's exactly what we would do if one of those guardrails is hit to make sure we get back on track so we stay in that quote unquote success rate for retirement.
So kind of keeping with the same idea of like, how do we think about it and talk about it with clients, but a little more concrete. I wonder if you could each share with me kind of what parts of the software you most often go over with clients, and maybe if you have kind of a talk track that you tend to use. Are there parts that you use in like every client presentation? Are there parts of the app that you go to for certain types of clients or certain situations, certain questions they like trigger? Oh, okay, I got to go here to answer that question. What's sort of the process for you? And it may be different for each of you.
Yeah, I'd like to start off with just going through, like, so I'll open up like where the pencil is, like just kind of verifying that all the inputs are correct with the client. Like, we got the assets right, we got liabilities and Social Security and everything like that. And don't spend a ton of time on it because, they've taken the time to provide it before. But then I like to, kind of finish it up by hitting the finish button, letting that screen pop up, and then showing them what, a moderate income setting would look like. So, kind of keeping that income setting in the middle, talking to them about what this means. So what does this actual income mean? How do we define guardrails? Where are the guardrails in comparison? And that's kind of where you really see the people start to, let their guard down and just relax a little bit, when typically in a typical plan, the guardrail is some ways away. And when they see that, it's so far away and that the likelihood of it happening, even though it could happen, the likelihood of it happening is small. And if it does happen, the change that needs to be made is also usually pretty manageable and pretty reasonable. That's where you really get a lot of the anxiety from them, the what ifs and the uncertainties of retirement really kind of die at that point. And so I love this page. I think this page speaks volumes. And then I go through basically cash flows just so they can get the visual of what happens, like when Social Security and things like that kick in. This is also an important page because you could really illustrate that they're spending more of their money in the early years when they're young and healthy, if they're choosing to use that kind of track. And then I do like to do the historical analysis too, because it really does add context.
So if you were using this, do you use it with everybody, or is there like a question that triggers you to use it? And when you use it, how do you present this page?
I use it with everybody, but I'm in a position where most of my clientele are similar, as in like, very analytical and things like, so I like to go through this as a normal part of the process, just so they can see, so I can show them, okay, based on history, look at all these times when the amount of money you could have taken out of your plan is well above the line, right? The line being what we're proposing. And then there are a few times where they were below the line, and those would be the times that would trigger where we would most likely hit a guardrail and you'd have to make a change. And then I usually flop back to the income page and show them. And again, that change would be this. And I show them what that change is.
Nice. Do you have a preference on this one if you're using the retirement smile, do you show it real or nominal?
Both. I like to show both because I'll tell them, in real dollars, we're spending more of our money in the beginning, and then statistically, you're going to slow down just as you do less, and you become a little less mobile, and it just naturally happens as your age progresses. But then nominally, we're still going to keep up with inflation by giving you those cost of living raises. You just may take smaller cost of living raises or none as the years go on to compensate for the fact that you're actually reducing your income in today's dollars. I like to show both.
So what's your workflow or your presentation flow like?
So unique clients like to be treated uniquely, and based on their situation, I tend to have three things, and depending on where their action drivers are, I focus on those three things. Like, for example, the income scenarios, I might have a client that who's been talking continuously about retiring a year earlier. So I can show, hey, our current plan implemented is at 16,650. If you retire a year earlier, that 16,650 goes to 15,800. So they know the impact of retiring a year earlier. We might also have a situation where, okay, I don't want that income to go down, but I do want to I do want to retire a year earlier. So then I end up going to LifeHub and I specifically go to the FinFlow diagrams. And when you look in the FinFlow diagrams, we try to figure out where that $500 might come from. So this is beautiful because then I don't have to redo this in the Sankey-Matic, which I think a lot of people are doing today. This is on autopilot. It's a true north and it's fantastic. So this leads to very good conversations. It's about getting the right balance of, hey, this is how much you're making. This is how much is going to taxes. This is how much is going to savings, and everything else reflects your values. So now are we having the conversation of this is how much you're spending on benefits today. If you retire early and aren't on Medicare, do we need to devote that much to the healthcare savings place? Or it could be, and that's when we go to the tax center. We say, hey, if we can keep your income down to a certain level, now all of a sudden you get the ACA tax credits and we don't have to actually replace that benefit spending that you see in the difference between your gross and net salary. It might also be, hey, given the 5-year Roth rule, we are going to make it so that we don't have Roth conversions between the ages of 56 and 61 so that you remain qualified for those ACA tax credits. So based on the needs of the client, I try to choreograph the FinFlow diagram here. The scenario is based on what triggers mean the most to them, whether it's their retirement age or savings rate, and then show the impact of the tax center of, hey, how we can maximize their post-tax lifetime income.
Makes sense. Andy, how about you? What kinds of are your favorites for using with, maybe all or most clients?
Yeah, so my presentation flow is very similar to Ryan's. I'll start in the facts section. Again, just to kind of make sure that all the numbers are correct. I mean, no matter how hard we try, sometimes information is lost in the flow there, but just confirming all the numbers are correct. And that also brings up sometimes some planning opportunities. If we hear, oh, hey, I've got an extra 300,000 in cash. Well, oh, okay, what's your plan for that cash right now? So it does bring up planning opportunities. But then I also go into the income plan once I've got all the facts updated. And I start here and start with the proposed income and say, okay, so this is where we're standing. If we make no changes from where you are now, this is where we're trending. And then historically, this is probably going to be changing going forward, but historically to this point from here, I've gone into test plan and I've actually walked through the test plan section. Now, a lot of times, as I'm sure many of you are aware, when you test this, it does take a little while. So when this is running here and the circle is spinning, I use this to kind of explain how the software is looking at historical periods and how it's using the guardrails to determine when changes are needed. So I'm walking them through the actual mechanics of the software right now, talking about, going back to 1871, going on a monthly basis if you had retired in any given month in that time period. And I'm laying that out so that there's not just dead air time, while we're waiting for this to run. But once I get in here, and this is where I'm saying this may change going forward now that there is the new Retire Me When feature out here. And I'll talk on that in a second. But what I've done is essentially I've used this and said, basically, again, this is not a success or failure. This is saying, do we meet your goal over the course of retirement, or are we above or below that goal? And a lot of times, if we're setting up the plan appropriately and making any necessary changes, we can get that below plan in a pretty good place. Maybe it's even if it's 30% below plan. I say, now think about it with me this way. That's not a 30% chance that you're running out of money. This is saying that in order to make the plan work, 30% of the time we had to make compromises in spending over time. And then I go to the average below and I'll say, on average, when we weren't quite able to hit your goal, we only missed by whatever it is, 2%, 3%. So I say, even in those times where we did not hit your goal, whether it was something economically going on, something with the market, inflation, whatever it was, if we made the proper changes, your retirement was only short, your goal was only short by, whatever, 4 or 5%. And that really resonates with them. But I think I'd like to get away from that even further because it still is using a percent number where I'm much more comfortable using a dollar number for clients. And we've actually been talking with folks from Income Lab, and I know that there's a lot of focus on moving that conversation to dollars from percentages. But so what we're doing now, actually go back to the income screen, if you would, Justin. So what we've been shifting our conversation to now, and just because the conversation flows better from this standpoint overall, I think, is we start here. We say, okay, similar to what Ryan was saying, here's your proposed income based on what we know now. Here's the guardrails where if we were to reach this point, this might prompt us to make a change. Then I go into the retire me when that Justin was just in. And this is a really cool feature because we're able to select whatever plan we're looking at and look in different environments and say, well, what would have actually happened with spending over time? So we'll start with our base plan, and I'll pull up these different environments and I'll say, we can look at various different times throughout history that might have been a stretch or a struggle with the portfolio, with the overall income plan, but let's see how it actually played out. And many, many times we'll see that actual income is above where that planned income is wanting to be. So this is really comforting to clients to see, even if I had retired in the Great Depression, my actual spending capacity never would have dropped below my goal. So that's really comforting for them to see. So I am starting to spend a lot more time in here to show, hey, even if we get a period like we've seen in the past, that would have been really a big stretch on the portfolio. As long as we're making the necessary adjustments over time, we're able to make sure that this plan is trending towards success more often than not.
Yeah, and my example plan is extremely conservative here. So I think typically you probably will see a few spots where it's below the original plan, which is also a nice way to show them, hey, when we are below, this is what it looks like. This is how much and for how long. It's not that I think we're literally about to start the Great Depression again, but if we did, here's how it would behave. Do you have
what I've seen
spot?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Justin. What I've seen in this a lot of times is even if it's below the planned income, a lot of times, if we're solving for spending capacity, oftentimes that spending capacity is above their spending goal anyway. So if it's below that spending capacity, we still have room to where it's saying, your goal is 5,000, your spending capacity is 8,000. Yes, it may dip below that in bad times like the Great Depression, but we're still sitting at 6,500 compared to your 5,000 goal. So it's really helpful in that conversation.
Nice. That's interesting. I've heard that word a few times, and I know we've definitely been using it, and even in the new version of the dashboard, which should be out in about a month, which is kind of a simplification of this screen where we're using that term. Do you have any experience with this shift from, defining a budget, defining, the income you need, and then getting a score on it versus kind of the spending capacity? What can I spend? Framing of retirement planning. Is that something you actively talk about with clients? And if so, how?
The thing I'm noticing is that the conversations have a lot more engagement because the proposed income or spending capacity actually triggers questions in their head of how much am I spending now? How much is going to have to come out of my account after Social Security? I find the questions are much more tactical and engaging when you're dealing with a dollar sign versus a probability. Going back to the previous thing where you're showing the Great Depression, I have some clients that are airline pilots, and I'm just telling them, hey, right now you're below glide slope. However, we have this many amount of space before we're supposed to put wheels on the deck, and this is how we need to make any course corrections. So actually showing that proposed income is going to change and setting the expectation from the start that proposed income might change as a result of scenarios like this is actually, it's a great way to dictate tempo with your clients. And at the same time, let them take the lead with actually having the conversations of how they spend money today.
Yeah, Justin, I'd like to also, just like JC said it, how he shows retiring at different times. So let's say retiring a year earlier, 2 years earlier, a year later, and what the impact of that is. If you go back to the income screen, I also like to present options with the client, and then talk to them about what I know about them and their personality, but just in things like changing their portfolio allocation. The income setting is huge, right? So when I talk to them about the income setting and tell them, like, hey, for example, if you wanted to start at a higher income, but have a higher chance or a greater chance that you're going to hit a guardrail, or would you rather start, at a lower income, but have a much less chance of hitting a guardrail somewhere in the middle, and show them what those different plans look like right on the spot? That it kind of empowers them to make the decision themselves, to be able to say, I like, based on my personality and how I know myself, I think I would feel more comfortable at this particular place, right? Or some people will say, I want to start as high as possible because I want to spend it early, and I'm willing to risk the fact that I may have to make a change earlier than some other people would. So that's just it's a really good way to quickly go through dynamically a bunch of different options.
That makes sense. And so you'll just build, I don't have one here, but I would build, a couple of plans, one, retiring in 2025, another in 2024, one 2026, that kind of thing, and just say, hey, here are options. And maybe also combine that with, well, I forget who it was who was saying it, but if you retire earlier, that may mean your spending capacity is a little lower, but we can talk about adjustments, right? Like, okay, well, maybe it's worth being just a little bit, kind of loosening things up, spending a bit more and accepting a little higher chance that I'll have to pull back from that. But in exchange, I get to retire earlier, which is, kind of nice.
Absolutely.
I will say too, JC's point on the discussion that this brings up, when you're working with spending capacity and essentially, saying regardless of what your specific budget is, here's what you're capable or your spending capacity in the plan. That brings up additional planning opportunities in there where, sometimes we'll have a client spending capacities maybe $15,000 a month, but really they honestly have no desire to spend more than half that, say $7,000 a month. So they say, well, if our spending capacity is so much higher, what does that mean for us? We're never going to spend that much. And then we have the discussion, well, that could bring up legacy goals, that could bring up charitable giving goals. Really, the fact that you have so much room in that spending capacity means that your portfolio can sustain a lot higher level of withdrawals than what you're actually planning. So that means we're going to have additional discussions over time about those other goals you might have, gifting to heirs, to family, to friends, charitable giving, whatever that may be. It does bring up additional conversations as well.
I know we've sometimes had that question about both in terms of, hey, what if my spending capacity is a lot higher than I actually think? And you addressed that in a really great way. What about the concept of adjustment? I know I just saw an article by David Blanchett about, this big survey he did on how much people feel they can adjust certain things. And it was higher than I expected. I mean, people were, at least in this survey, I think it was like 1,500 people, really flexible. Do you ever get pushback from clients on this idea of adjustment, or does it just totally make sense to them?
Yeah, so I think having used the software in the last year or so, it's been a perfect time to transition to the software with what's been going on with inflation, because it's a perfect time to have that discussion with folks where I'll kind of say, in previous tools or in other tools that are out there, it is kind of like, we're just setting a number and we're working with that number throughout time, and it's not really going to change. It's just going to tell us what's the possible outcome if we work with this number. But then I have that discussion, is that really how you guys live your life in reality? And they'll say, well, no. I say, spending is different from month to month, right? And they say, yeah. And I say, well, what even the last couple of years when groceries have gotten more expensive, gas has gotten more expensive, have you guys been living the exact same lifestyle that you were 2 or 3 years ago? They say, no, absolutely not. Maybe we're going out to eat less, or we're we're driving less. Maybe we're doing something more close to home on vacations, whatever it may be. They're making adjustments in life to make sure that their dollars are going as far as they were even just 2 or 3 years ago. So when they're able to see, even in real life, recently, we've made those same adjustments that we're talking about in the retirement plan. It really hits home for them to say, well, yeah, we can make adjustments if we need to. And the thought that, if we get another Great Depression or, another global pandemic and something happens to the markets that really changes beyond anything we expected, is it realistic to think we're just going to go along with the same behaviors, the same spending level? And they understand, no, it's not. And they say, yeah, we've made changes in the last 2 years, So what's to stop us from expecting we could make changes in retirement as well? So it's been a really, top of mind discussion to have, especially over the last couple of years.
That's great. I know one other thing that now in this example plan, I haven't set a desired income at all, which that sometimes is shocking to people when they first see Income Lab, that often think, well, hang on, I don't have to put in anything about what I want to spend, right? So two questions about that. One is, if you do have some excess spending capacity, and maybe you've already, made some adjustments, added, a legacy goal, maybe you've, pegged your income setting down low because, hey, we don't have to take that much income risk, and you still have some room. One other thing I've heard, and I know JC, you talk about tax planning a lot, is if there's space, well, that kind of shows that maybe there's some tax planning, Roth conversions, that kind of thing that you can do. Does anyone have, examples or just, ways that you go about tax planning and talk about tax planning with clients using Income Lab?
At the risk of being redundant, I use it quite a bit with the ACA tax credits for those that are retiring early. How do we maximize post-tax lifetime income? And going through the tax center and the evaluations of, hey, we are proposing that we do pro rata, but that's not the optimal. The optimal is actually this scenario here. I don't know if you're pulling that up or not, Justin, but just showing clients what that post-tax value add is, I find to be quite beneficial with folks.
So just the kind of the comparison screen?
Yes. Yes. So actually showing that, hey, all right, hey, I want to manage to the 24% tax bracket. Well, what if I told you the 32% tax bracket actually improved your post-tax lifetime income? And this is a great display. This is part of my my normal reports for this page to be there. And yeah, I think editing these is well worth everyone's time to see. So you can show which one in terms of total taxes, net income, and net legacy, depending on what you're trying to optimize for. This is something I use almost every time.
And one thing I think we've also got questions about before, we put a star on the one that is, lowest average tax rate, lowest taxes, highest net income, that kind of thing. But sometimes the differences are, tiny, not,
Right.
We're talking 20, 30 years here. The chances these numbers actually turn out exactly that is very low, right? So do you do some kind of, applying a little art along with the science here?
Yeah, the art comes in with how much are they making today? What's their human capital worth going forward? Their mindset of where they think taxes will be in the future, and if they want to play that arbitrage, that tends to happen quite often. And at the same time, I like to say, hey, this is what you're paying in taxes. This is what you're saving. Are we at risk of having lifestyle creep going forward? Because this is going to be the cost of that lifestyle creep that you're not accounting for in your taxes. Mm-hmm. So actually showing that, and Jeff Levine has talked often that a Roth conversion is tax insurance as much as it's anything. It's diversification and it's insurance. And whether you're doing that with a donor advised fund and compensating that with a Roth conversion or however that may happen, it leads to just much better conversations of how you are making taxes, which tends to be quite a trigger with many people, to be very actionable and something that they can take control of.
I like that. Are there other screens here that you find yourself using with clients in the tax center?
I like through some people like to see it. Oh, sorry, JC. Some people like to see it broken down year by year. So I go to the Explore tab and then just kind of click through the different years to show them just, what does it mean to do this type of tax management and how does that progress throughout the years? And then also the, if you go to the Life Hub and then the flows will also show, the Roth conversions and things like that. And that really gives them a visual of, like where is the money coming from? Where is it going to? At what point are we going to start using it? how does that help us with our tax bracket management? So it's been the tax planning module has been probably one of, if not the most powerful tool when differentiating between me and another advisor.
And Justin, I need to bring this one up. I have a client who's 58 and their parents just died. There's the second parent just died, and now they've got a $1.8 million inherited IRA. So all of a sudden now I have to plan for that and think about everything from IRMA to you name it. And then it really kicks in terms of the value of how do we choreograph how we take the money out. Does one retire? Does the one that wanted to retire early actually now retire early so that we can get some other things accomplished in life and know what that impact is? But that the inherited IRA component, I'm finding to be a place where I can really show some value.
So will you kind of use the tax center and find spots maybe where instead of a Roth conversion, you'll take some of that inherited IRA?
Yes. Or for instance, if they are a professor at a university and they decide to take their sabbatical at a different time now, so that they can actually take out more of that. I mean, it's leading to those types of conversations.
That makes sense. Makes sense. I think we had a couple of kind of pre-submitted questions from attendees. I think some of these were maybe already answered, but one was kind of what's the best way to show or summarize the parts that make up the plan? Kind of if they want more confidence in the plan, be sure everything's in there right, and so on. I think a lot of you said you use the, the inputs. I know I've heard LifeHub as well. What's been your experience with using LifeHub for that kind of thing?
I actually have been using, there's actually a great report section in here. If we just want a summary of what the plan includes, I've created my own template for reports that I can send to clients. So you can choose what screens, what information you want to include in those reports. You can have assets in there. You can have year by year breakdown of spending versus income sources. So you can create your own reports in there that'll summarize the overall plan. And that just helps, we have a tendency to save reports from future years, and then we can see how those have changed over time. So yeah, just including a report in there is a good way to do it. LifeHub is I think LifeHub is a good real-time updater for the clients. So if you give clients access to log in to Income Lab, they can go into LifeHub and see kind of where they are today and then where things are trending or projected to change in the future. So I use both of those to kind of give them a summary of what's happening. Again, reports for kind of that snapshot view of what the plan looks like over time. And then LifeHub for kind of a real-time today's view of things.
Actually, that was another question was, are there particular report modules and pieces that you use a lot? Do you use the reports? It sounds like you do. Are there kind of some favorite modules there, Andy?
Yeah, actually, I can pull up on my and see what I have selected on there. I won't share it if that's okay, Justin, but let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, so on those, I've got the cover page, I've got the balance sheet, tax allocation, long-term income outlook, and short-term income plan. So those, I think it's like a 10-page report, something like that. So not too much to where it's overwhelming, but enough to where they can see really all the information that they need to see to get an idea of what's actually happening on a year-by-year breakdown.
Great, thank you. Anybody else on the reports? Do you use, PDF style reports? And if so, kind of what sorts of parts do you like?
I like to create a really simple report that kind of just has the income and the guardrails on it. And I transfer that report over into a shared box folder for each client. And so instead of them logging into their portal and seeing like a changing probability of success, which will ultimately, especially, in recent times, will spark a lot of conversation, they could just go back and refer right back to that guardrail report and say, basically what most of the feedback has been is we're not anywhere close to that. So I'm not concerned. Right, so that's how I use it. I do make a longer form report because a lot of my clients want that level of detail, but just for the purposes of, you know, referring back for their income, I do make a really short one, just kind of this page.
That makes sense.
I have 3 templates saved. I have the retired template created. I have the kitchen sink template created, and then I have the executive summary template created. And I basically just have those 3, and based on the analytical prowess or needs of the client, those 3 have served me well. But the fact that I can save 3 templates and not have to reinvent it every single time has worked really well.
Great. Well, thank you. That's kind of the initial part of the conversation here. This has been awesome. I know we have a whole bunch of questions, and I'm gonna turn
One
over to
thing.
Amber.
Yeah, one thing on this, for all the attendees, we do have a lot of questions in there. So if you want to like them, and it'll upvote them since we have so many, and we can make sure that the most sought out questions get answered, and we'll maybe have some follow up with the remaining questions. But Justin, with that, you can see the ones that are liked the most if you want to tackle those.
Sure. So I think let's hit kind of one of the easier parts of this first. So, for clients that you're using a plan like this, how often are you changing the client's income or letting them know that their spending capacity could change, or needs to change up or down? Is that something that's happening a lot, or is it pretty infrequent?
Because typically the guardrails are, a good ways away for most people, just the way that the plans are laid out, that unless they have something come up like a one-time expense or, something that wasn't in the plan, something, that came up like a family issue or health issue or something, really not adjusting the income. So it really has reduced the workload in that aspect. And then, just kind of doing the normal January, February, like, Social Security and tax bracket kind of updates. But other than that, it really has reduced the amount of time I spent in the planning software, I'd say probably by 50%.
Yeah, and I think to get a feel for how often a plan might actually call for a change, you can do that in plan test for sure, because it'll just say, hey, on average, how often. But another place to see like a real example is in Retire Me When. If you switch it to nominal, so that includes inflation adjustments. Now you can kind of see, all right, here's one that began before the .com, but you can just kind of see, all right, I got one in 99, another one in 2000, and then another one not till end of 2001. Then I went a really long time, 2004, right? So it for this plan, it seems to be kind of 1 to 3 years. And then you have some pretty long periods, right? Where from 09 to 14, there was nothing to do, both because there wasn't much inflation at that time, right? I mean, that was the a period from the global financial crisis where inflation was negative sometimes. But you can see, as long as I'm in the white, right, in the no change range between the guardrails, I'm not doing anything. So I know that's a question we often get is, okay, is using Income Lab going to force me to do lots and lots of stuff all the time? And, this is just an example where no, in fact, what it's going to do is make sure you're not doing things unnecessarily. Andy, I know you mentioned, and we're actually next month gonna talk about Income Lab kind of in your tech stack, how it, you use it with other kinds of software and so on. But just a quick question about kind of where you mentioned use eMoney, how do you kind of, juggle those two?
Yeah, so to be completely frank, when we got on board with Income Lab, our intention at the time was to try to transition all planning over to Income Lab. So we're talking, long-term care expenses, we're talking life insurance needs, things like that. We tried to do it all. It's all about consolidation, trying to reduce costs. So if we could get rid of eMoney, that would be great. But as we found in using the software, and actually our team was out in Colorado recently, and we were able to meet with Johnny, which was great. And his thought was, Income Lab we're going to stay in our lane, right? We're a retirement income planning tool. We're going to be the best at that feature. So we have actually very recently made the decision that we are going to integrate multiple planning tools, specifically Income Lab for income planning and retirement. But we are still going to be using other tools like eMoney if we're doing, a long-term care analysis or like I mentioned, a life insurance needs analysis or college planning or a lump sum purchase, things like that. Those more detailed items that you need to be a little bit more customizable for and a little more detail oriented. We are using those other tools for that, but Income Lab specifically is our go-to absolute best tool available for income planning. So just speaking from experience, we have 6 advisors on staff right now. They were having issues as far as relaying and explaining those different items in Income Lab. We're using a lot of workarounds and a lot of backdoor things to try to get to the final information. Our planning team was having difficulty doing it. And we're really thankful to Johnny for being honest and just saying, hey, that's not our lane. That's not what we're best at. So we are going to be using other tools for those other items and combining them all into an overall comprehensive planning suite. So Income Lab will be specifically for income planning, taxes as well, if we're doing a Roth conversion analysis and things like that. But we want to stay in our lane with Income Lab to where we let it do what it's absolutely best at.
I know I said something earlier kind of about, if your GPS told you your probability of success in getting to your destination went down, it wouldn't be very useful. And that's true, right? You really want to know what to do, not, getting a score. But it's interesting, like even a score, a success and failure score, or, to use JC's, I forget the terminology you used, but kind of a like funded ratio or, what's my projected income? Like that works fine in pre-retirement. If I'm in my 20s and 30s, in a way, me wanting to get my score up is good. It leads to good behavior. It leads to more saving. So if you think about kind of what you're trying to accomplish with clients in different life phases, at least from my point of view, there's really nothing particularly wrong with success and failure. If you're just talking about pre-retirement saving, it kind of pushes people to do the right thing. The problem is it becomes not useful at and in retirement because now I don't know what to do, right? So yeah, I think that's interesting. And it's a story we've actually heard a lot. Like you said, we're really just focused on the retirement planning part. Another question with a lot of votes.
I want to share a thought on that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Things with clients is that anyone that sees a range from 0 to 99 will automatically think that 99 is the best, right? And you're right, like when you're young and saving stuff, the higher you get that, the better. But for different people with different lives and different goals, someone with a 50% probability of success may be more aligned with their goals. Let's say, for example, they don't have a legacy, they don't have children, they want to spend every dollar before their end of time, but they're automatically going to try to shoot for 99%, which is going to be very much overly conservative, thinking that the higher the number, the better. So that's completely eliminated that conversation, right? Right plan for the right person, and don't compare yourself to that number or other people's numbers.
Definitely. This relates to what we did talk a little bit before, but how do you use this, the proposed income or spending capacity, the desired income, the essential income goals? Do you use them? Do you, just put in bottom line numbers, or do you do, full budgeting? How do you do that in Income Lab?
Yeah, so I'll speak to that. So we, coming from eMoney, we definitely started with, hey, what's your budget? What's your spending goal? We want to put that in there. We were even solving for income quite often to where we were saying, this is what we want to spend. What's the above plan, below plan percent? And we really started to shift from that and say, really, all we want to know is what is your spending capacity? And if your desired spending is below that, well, you're in great shape. If it's above that, well, then we have to talk about different options, whether it's doing a new scenario of retiring later or saving more or whatever that may be, adjusting the income setting up or down to be more conservative or aggressive. So we do, if we know what their ideal budget is, we'll put that in there. But we are no longer really solving for that budget. It's more of just a basically a mile marker to say, you know, are we at or above that point? And if we are, then we're great. Then they know, you know, they can go and live their life and without having to worry about, am I spending exactly $6,512 a month? You know, if they go over a month, well, they don't need to worry about it because their spending capacity is $2,000 higher. So we really focus on the spending capacity and use the desired income as kind of, like I said, just kind of like a benchmark. And really the essential income, I think that's the term for it. We talk about that very little because a lot of times clients don't really take the time to figure out what their essential income is. So we'll put something in there just as kind of like a placeholder, but we focus more on spending capacity, secondarily on desired income, just like I said, as a benchmark.
Makes sense. We have a ton more questions, but we're almost out of time. So I apologize to everybody who is will not have their questions answered live. But that said, let me pick one that's got a lot of votes here. Maybe this would be our last question.
I'm seeing a lot of solve for income and income.
Yeah, well, there's one with 9, which is, okay, how many of you have actually implemented a plan versus just revisiting the analysis? And it sounded like, at least in pre-retirement, there's a fair amount of revisiting the analysis, which, by the way, that's all that is in pre-retirement. But in retirement is when you're actually getting, you know, did I hit a guardrail? So have any of you, there may be different answers on this, do you implement plans? If so,
About half of mine are implemented because most of my clients are retired or very close to. So about half are implemented, and I haven't had an issue with hitting a guardrail yet, even with last year's, you know, market performance. But about 50% are implemented, and I'd say a bunch more would be over the next year or two, and the other half are people who are planning and adjusting and making changes and trying to get to the finish line of retirement.
yeah, I noticed in retirement when this was probably the experience of a lot of people who implemented a plan and call it 2001, early 2002, this is what you would have seen happen, right? We're getting a lot closer to it, but it's remarkable, you know, how often you don't quite hit it. One reason for that, by the way, is if you put a minimum change in, right? You say, hey, I'm not going to make a small change. I'm going to make 5% or more. Well, then it won't tell you to do something, right? It'll just kind of push that guardrail away a little bit if the change would be too minor to do. But I think this is just to give a feel for a lot of implemented plans from 2001. Yeah, they're getting close and they're bouncing around. You know, we get one more big hit on their portfolio, they'll probably have an adjustment.
That's why I think Income Lab is a strong prospect tool too. You know, if I meet a client that is interviewing multiple advisors and the other advisors are using a probability of success meter, and I'll pull up like a picture of it and say, is your advisor, the other advisor you met, using this? And they would say, yeah, most of them. I would say, okay, for the probabilities that, you know, the 20%, 25% that ended in failure, what was the exact plan that they put in place to mitigate that and adjust the plan? And it usually at that point, it's kind of like a blank stare, which means that they didn't talk about it. And that means that showing them the planned income with the guardrails and everything that we just went through, it's different. It stands out, and it really does make an impact. And that's probably won me more business over the past year and a half than I think any other tool or tactic or anything that I'm using. So.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great place to wrap this up. I want to thank our panelists. It's just been fantastic. I think we'll do a lot more of these, given the robust question and answer session. So, you know, we'll reach out to Income Lab firms, users, and you know, if you're interested in being part of a panel, let us know. Let's thank the 3 who are on the panel today. Really appreciate it, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, one thing on that, Justin, we do have a Lab Talk Tuesday coming up on the 3rd Tuesday of every month. And then the 4th Tuesday, next month, we're having using Income Lab in your tech stack. So we'll have panelists for that. And then at the end of this, I know some people have already exited the webinar, but we do have a survey. Obviously, we got to this having advisors present. based on the request for it. So please add your feedback to the survey at the end of this Zoom meeting as well. So thank you all again. And we look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thanks, everybody.